Olympia is running at full gear. She has called in an artist to help her with an idea for the museum, and they have decided to go camping to talk more privately and without interruptions. Will this be a normal camping trip or something more? Let's find out if she ends up repeating her last camping trip. It's just a camping trip, Chris said, organizing her half of the gear into her pack. Relax, will ya? Easy for you to say, Olympia retorted, packing her own gear. My last camping trip was one straight out of Hell's Vacation Guide. Well, you're going camping with me, not some deranged lunatic who can't keep his mind straight. We'll be fine. Famous last words. Do you have to bring that damn thing along? Olympia complained, tossing the weapon Chris was preparing for the trip in a disgusted look. Would you prefer fighting wild animals and whatnot with our bare hands? Chris shot back. It's better to have it and not need it than it is to need it and not have it. That's true, I guess. Olympia nodded as she imagined every possible assailant that could bump into them out there. Cultists, hobos, coyotes, bobcats, and every other form of predator filled her head with all sorts of unwelcome scenarios. She shuddered as chills ran down her back. She was still processing what had happened at the lake bed, and didn't want a repeat to happen for a long while. Don't worry. Whether we're at your place or Uncle Nate and Aunt Mattie's, we won't get a lot of talking done with everything that typically happens. Camping is our only choice. Olympia took a deep breath, forcing herself to relax, and nodded. That's very true. I also don't want leaks about the project I have in mind for the museum getting into the local gossip mills either. Chris chose the spot, which made Olympia less nervous, as it was in a known area for regular camping. She would come to Ethereal Springs at least once every other year, but after her roommate moved in, she hadn't had a chance to until now. Olympia was curious about that, having heard a small portion of the conversation between the other woman and the older couple earlier, but wasn't curious enough to stick her nose where it didn't belong. Speaking of antiques and such, Chris suddenly said, pausing on the trail, I have something to show you once we set up camp. If it's all right with you, of course. Absolutely, Olympia agreed. Glad to have something else to occupy her mind for a while. They had their tents set up before lunchtime and set to talking shop while they ate. Olympia showed Chris the video and images from the lake, as well as pictures of the journals. Chris was visibly interested in the project, and Olympia even went so far as to think the woman was excited to see such a thing. After finding that homestead, Olympia had been nothing short of creeped out and uneasy about those damn books, but she was still determined to find every answer to every question that was because of them. What made things worse was when Chris pointed out Olympia and Cicero had captured more than what they saw with their own eyes, revealing a nearly fully transparent figure lurking somewhere in the background of almost every still photo and video frame. Okay, that's enough, Olympia declared, fed up with having that memory replayed to its fullest in more ways than one. Will you accept this project or not? Where do I sign? Chris grinned. All right, business is only half completed, Olympia said, glad to not have to look at that sand thing anymore for at least the rest of the day. What did you want to show me? Right, Chris said, standing to get her tablet out of her bag. I don't remember that being there, she muttered, staring at something in the distance. What are you talking about? Olympia wondered, standing next to Chris to see for herself. That track over there, Chris said, pointing. See it? I'm not aware of any train tracks being in this area at all. We never had a train station here ever in history, so I don't know why there would be a track here. Ethereal Springs is too far from any major cities from back when trains were all the rage for tracks to even exist in the area. The women walked over to the tree line where Chris had seen it, and sure enough, There indeed was a track sitting there. It looked as if it had been broken by something, just cutting off right at the edge of the woods. Olympia was visibly nervous as she and Chris looked at each other. Chris shrugged her shoulders as Olympia chewed on her lip. The pair decided they might as well check it out, see what they find. Olympia couldn't remember any mention of train tracks in the manuscripts that Cicero had brought to her, and made it a point to mention that to Chris. The track went on for quite a distance, finally heading to a clearing about 3 miles from the girls' campsite. What sat on it in this clearing had both their jaws dropping. A full steam locomotive sat there, obviously abandoned and in surprisingly fair condition. The engine itself had seen better days, rust taking its toll. The coal car was still pretty full, and several of its other attachments had certainly seen better days as their wooden components were rotting away. There were at least 4 cars between the coal car and the caboose, the latter nearly impossible to explore as it was far too deteriorated to step foot in. There were no markings on it to indicate owner or anything, not even a number on the engine. This sort of thing was soon becoming no surprise to Olympia, as she wondered what was causing this habit. "What do you make of this?" Chris wondered, trying to peek into the windows of the passenger cars. "Not a clue," Olympia sighed, shrugging her shoulders. "There is definitely something weird going on in this town, though. First the journals show up at the library. Now we start finding all this weird stuff that shouldn't have been so easy to just ignore." Chris agreed entirely, nearly falling off the car she was standing on, her toes nearly losing traction on the mechanical components under the car. What she saw inside, naturally startling, but more unexpected than finding this abandoned train in the first place. Buried under a thick layer of dust was enough stuff to say the train had indeed gone undiscovered since its abandonment. Neither woman had any clue as to how these things had gone unnoticed in all the years they had existed, but it was clear they had. Chris brought up the possibility of this whole thing being a prank or publicity stunt. It would be a very expensive one, Olympia argued, shaking her head. Matching papers and inks to fit certain periods, then going to all the trouble of staging things like this, she added, gesturing to the antique locomotive. "I doubt even the highest budget filmmakers could pull these off, with the amount of historical accuracy I have seen. Carbon dating doesn't lie, especially around here where there are no factories or major pollutants contaminating samples." Olympia's explanation plausible, the two continued exploring the train, taking pictures and video on their phones. 19th century items were all over the inside of the train, from wallpaper down to carpets, lighting, furniture, and so on. Not remembering reading about this train in the journals, Olympia was considering reporting this find to the museum. That is, until Chris managed to force the door open on the final intact car, and they came face to face with a discovery neither had expected. Sitting around what seemed to be a poker table were several corpses, each one quite decomposed. Their clothing's remains just barely enough to determine they were as old as the steam locomotive itself. Olympia rushed out, unused to these sorts of sights, as she rarely ever left Ethereal Springs, while Chris remained inside, examining the remains as best she could. "I didn't take this job to find dead bodies at every turn," Olympia complained as she lost her lunch. "How on earth can you stand it, Chris? The smell alone is enough to make me... ugh." "My dad was a cop and often came home smelling like death," Chris explained while Olympia coughed and retched. "You get used to it after a while." Chris slowly and carefully walked around the table, counting 2 empty chairs. She also saw evidence of how each cadaver at the table met its end, the causes varying from blunt force to bullet holes. She wouldn't be surprised if any of them had perished from having their throats slit. The table was still plenty full of the players' winnings, bets, and even their cards were still on the table, and in their hands. There was something off about this, but Chris couldn't quite put her finger on what. This didn't look at all like a robbery. She doubted if even Jesse James would target a private train with some few passengers like this one. After searching the rest of the train, they found the earthly remains of the conductor stuffed into a long cold boiler, and another body in one of the other private cars. It was certain whatever happened on this train was enough to warrant the destruction of the tracks to hide it, as well as leaving all evidence on board. Ethereal Springs is just full of surprises. This train wasn't mentioned in any of the journals, and for it to be the final resting place of what appears to be a poker game gone bad on top of it, is just icing on the mystery cake, isn't it? We'll have to wait and see if anything ever comes of it. Slap that subscribe button and hook that rope to the bell so you'll be notified when there is a new piece to the puzzle hidden within the series. If you liked the story, hit those like and share buttons so others can enjoy the mystery as it unfolds. Leave a comment if you wish. I'm always looking for ways to improve the quality of my writing. The link to merch is right down below in the description and on my channel's banner links. Remember, life would be boring without a few scare.